I'm attorney Eric Lewis with Lewis Legal Services in Indianapolis. Today I have an update with the new national means test numbers recently released by the Department of Justice. They go into effect on November 1st, 2025. This is an update I wasn't sure we would be making with the government shutdown, which has slowed many government sectors to a halt. But here we are with new numbers. The means test is used in bankruptcy to determine eligibility in Chapter 7 cases where the majority of the debt is consumer debt as opposed to business debt or non-consumer debts. In Chapter 13 cases, the numbers are used in part to determine how much you're expected to pay back on your debts in a reorganization, a repayment plan. In Chapter 7 cases in which the majority of the debts are consumer debts, it helps determine eligibility based on your current monthly income and expenses, and comparing that with state average family income values that vary by household size. In Chapter 13 cases, it also helps determine what we call the commitment period, whether your Chapter 13 repayment plan has to be a minimum of 36 months, which is 3 years in duration, or a 5-year repayment plan, which is 60 months. And also how much you can reasonably pay back on your debts in what we call a determination of disposable income. In this video, I'm going to go over the changes that affect cases filed in Indiana and Illinois specifically, but I have also linked below where you can go to find these numbers for all states and jurisdictions. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at these changes. Effective November 1st, 2025, for consumer bankruptcy cases, these are the new numbers. What stands out to me with this update is that once again we are getting some wild adjustments to the numbers. In Illinois, which we'll talk about in a minute, the numbers went up by a pretty good margin, but in Indiana, the numbers went down almost across the board. A downward adjustment to these numbers is fairly rare. I think in the last 10 years, I've only seen it happen maybe 3 times before, once in 2015, a very small downward adjustment in 2019, and then again in the spring of 2023, and now here again in the autumn of 2025. These changes aren't huge, but for some people they make the difference between qualifying for a Chapter 7 and having to do a repayment plan of some type in Chapter 13. So if you're new to this, the way it works is if you're an individual filing bankruptcy and your debts are primarily consumer debts and there's no applicable exception to means testing that applies to you, such as current military service, for example, then you have to take a means test analysis. And this means test looks at your income for the 6 calendar months prior to the calendar month in which you file bankruptcy. So when we average that income and annualize it, the question becomes, where does that average put you in relation to these cutoff numbers? If your average is below these numbers, then there's no further analysis in terms of means testing. If your average is above these numbers, then further means testing is required to look at your specific expenses and judge your ability to pay back your debt, even if it just in part. Now, let's take a look at the numbers in the land of Lincoln. Unlike the changes to the numbers in Indiana, Illinois has a fairly healthy increase across the board for all family sizes. And just as before, once you get above a household size of 4, you add $11,100 per person. The biggest jump here is for a household of 2, and an increase of over $2,700 from $88,800 to $91,526. On the expense side of things, the means test basically uses these standardized numbers that we call the National Living Allowance, which is based on your household size. There are other expenses, of course, that you can take in a means test for Chapter 7 or a determination of disposable income in Chapter 13. Numbers that are unique to you, such as the certain amount of charitable contributions that you do, retirement contributions, what you pay for life insurance or health insurance. But some of these numbers, as you can see here, are set by law, and there can be some deviation for necessary expenses, but this is the expectation. And these numbers apply to all consumer bankruptcy cases, not just those in Indiana. So for means test analysis for eligibility, determination of disposable income in Chapter 13, or just the general reasonableness of your budget on Schedule J to your bankruptcy paperwork, The court looks at these numbers as a guide to determine if your deductions from income are both reasonable and necessary. Here, although the Department of Justice has revised the numbers for the median household income numbers, the means test numbers for typical household expenses are not changing, at least at this time, and they'll remain the same as the numbers that went into effect earlier this year back in May. That's it for today. If you have any questions, you can contact my office, reply to this video. And if you want to stay up to date on developments in bankruptcy law and other related things, please click subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.